Okay, looks like we're good to go now. Just had a couple of technical difficulties and actually, really, truthfully speaking, we just, just building on here, right? We're just building and we could have done just that thing alone, but we got a lot of information to share. So welcome everybody out there in Zoom land, and Facebook land. And this is going to be an amazing and awesome evening. First of all, my name is Bobby Damon Warren, and I am the founder of Peace, which is Please Educate All Children Equally. But it's not about me, and it's not about that. It's about these two amazing educators, these two like kings and queens in the movement for liberation through education of our people, right? And I'm just going to talk about them a little bit, and we're going to get right into it. First, we have Dr. Camika Royal. Dr. Royal is an urban education expert whose current work focuses on the intersections of race, politics, history, and urban school reform. She began her career teaching middle school language arts for the Baltimore City Public School System in 1999. She spent her first 7 years as an urban education professional in the public schools of Baltimore City and Washington, D.C., teaching, coaching teachers, and helping to lead a charter high school. In 2006, Dr. Royal returned to her hometown, Philadelphia, and transitioned to higher education, first by teaching pre-service teachers at Lincoln University, Pennsylvania, and then other colleges and universities in the Philadelphia, Baltimore regions, while she continued to coach and support urban school leaders and teacher educators. In 2014, she moved back to Baltimore as an assistant professor of urban education at Loyola University of Maryland. There, she helped to launch the Schools of Education's Urban Education Minor, and for 2 years, she led the Center of Innovation in Urban Education. Under her leadership, the CIUE's externally facing work was aimed toward anti-racist, anti-oppressive education in partnership with urban schools and community organizations. Dr. Royal is currently writing on a book, Black Educators and 50 Years of Racism in School Reform in Philadelphia. And I have to say, that's awesome and amazing. I'm glad I got a chance to be interviewed, but I'm not gonna talk about that. Dr. Royal, thank you for coming tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate you. Next I have a few pages here. I'm gonna try to summarize some of this stuff here. Got a couple of pages going on, but I gotta talk about this brother right here. Dr. Chike Akua. Dr. Chike Akua is a professor of educational leadership at Clark Atlanta University and a leading authority on increasing the achievement of today's students, especially those in some of the most challenging schools and communities. His book, Education for Transformation, I highly recommend that book, is a favorite among teachers and leaders and has been endorsed by a number of prominent national education educators. As a recognized master teacher, Dr. Akua has been an invited keynote presenter and trained at regional and national conferences, school systems, colleges, and universities. With a culturally relevant approach, he is known for his dynamic, interactive presentations to leaders, teachers, parents, and students. Dr. Akua has over 25 years of combined experience in education as a public school teacher, curriculum developer, professional development provider, leadership consultant, policy analyst, and university professor. In 1995, he was selected Teacher of the Year for the Newport News Schools in Virginia, and was also selected as one of Ebony Magazine's 50 Leaders of Tomorrow. A year later, in 1996, the DeKalb County Board of Education in Atlanta recognized him with the Excellence in Education Award for service to youth. Additionally, he has been invited lecturer for undergraduate and graduate courses in teacher education at Georgia State University, Southern University, Howard University, and Clark Atlanta University. He helped lead over 1,000 students and parents on trips throughout Egypt, Ghana, Morocco, Senegal, and through the African Genesis Institute Teen Summit 1000 program. Dr. Akua is frequently called upon by education, civic, social organizations to speak about educational excellence and cultural knowledge. All right, that's the summary. Good evening, brother Dr. Akua. How you doing, sir?
Good to be here with you, Baba Damon, and wonderful to be here with Dr. Royal as well.
So let's get into it. We have a lot to talk about, and tonight's topic, Black history is more than a month. And I have some talking points, and we're just going to have conversation and shout out to the movie tonight. It's premiering tonight. That's why I wore my shirt about the Black Panther Party, right? It's called Judas and the Black Messiah. Shout out to all those brothers. Even shout out to my frat brother from my chapter, Chris Davis, 2007. He's actually in the movie. I forget his role, but he's in the movie, and I'm gonna check it out when we get done here tonight. So all those brothers in the movie, excellent job. But definitely shout out to that young boy right there, Chris Davis. You know, we have to start by talking about Black History Month, right? And we'll start with that first. So I'm gonna share this picture, and it's really been disheartening. I'm gonna share my screen first. Be very, very brief with this. I'm gonna share it for one purpose, and I have to tell a story about this one photo. So this photo right here, you know, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, right? And I have the name there, you know, Father of Black History, because, you know, it's sad. It saddens me. Let me get this out the way. It saddens me that this past week, right, and for multiple days, when I'll show kids and I show adults, black, white, doesn't really matter. I start off by showing them a picture of George Washington. 100% of the people know who George Washington is, right? You know, because we're born and we go to elementary school and kindergarten, first grade, and we learn all of that. But when I show them this picture, I would say 90%, 95% of the people had no idea. I've done the young picture, I've done the old picture, and I'm talking about to, you know, people from the African diaspora, talking to Caucasian folk, and they have no idea who this is. And I say that, you know, start off with that for a reason, because it's sad when we talk about, you know, things that are going on in the world, and we talk about, you know, equity, and we talk about cultural responsiveness, we talk about all these kinds of things that, you know, most people don't know who that is on sight, but we all know who George Washington is on sight, you know. So talking about, you know, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who started Negro History Week, and later became Black History Month. So for those out there that do not know that, everybody should know that. That is equally important to everything else we've learned in school. You know, so as we talk about Black history being more than a month, yes, we have to pay homage to him because he started the week that became a month for us. But Black history is world history. So, you know, traditionally in most schools, we're just taught about, you know, possibly, you know, being slaves and maybe Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks. Every answer, if you ask a kid a question in school, you ask them, the answer is always Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks. I mean, they just go right to that because that's all that they know. And even today, where I was today, and I asked the young man, did he know who was on my shirt? I actually had a Carter G. Woodson shirt on earlier today. And he said, no, who is that? And I told him, he said, well, that's not my fault. I don't know. I said, you're right, brother. It's not your fault that you don't know. That's why I'm here to teach you who it is, right? So with that being said, and first of all, shout out to all the ACE schools, all the African Center schools, right, that do this work, right? And other schools that have programs that do this work. I'm not saying those schools do not exist because they do. Shout out to Harambe Charter Institute. You know, I used to work there for a little while too as a principal. But to you two, and to Kamika or Dr. Who, you can go, either one can go first. Speak to our audience on some key things we should know about our history before the transatlantic slave trade and why it's important for us to know these things.
I'll defer to Dr. Chike.
Well, I'll start with this. I think we need to understand, first of all, why our history has been hidden from us. I developed a theory called the theory of cultural identity theft. We know that regular identity theft is when someone steals your personal information to gain access to your resources. And what became clear to me as I actually went through that, when someone years ago stole my checkbook and was writing checks all over town and had to close down my account and took a long time to clear all that up and caused considerable stress. What was revealed to me in the process is that we as a people have been victims of cultural identity theft. And cultural identity theft is when someone steals your story. So how do you take the group of people who gave the world reading and writing and language and literature and architecture and engineering and agriculture and astronomy, mathematics and medicine and science and technology? How do you convince that group of people that they come from a group of pimps, players, criminals, thugs, and thoughts? Cultural identity theft. And so the few times that our history is taught, they usually started in slavery or civil rights, leaving out thousands and thousands of years of incredible history. And that's not by chance. And there have been many scholars and practitioners like yourself who understand how important that is to reconstruct it. But here's the thing. Teachers can't teach what they don't know, okay? And most teachers have been miseducated. And if you're a teacher that's been miseducated, all you can do is pass on the virus of miseducation. And that's not a slight against teachers. I am a teacher, but that is to say that every day I have to confront my own personal miseducation and be very intentional about re-educating myself. And what we find when we study about what happened prior to our enslavement is we find the incredible power that we had as a people. And the knowledge of that power has intentionally been kept from us. And I'll stop with this last point and make room for other comments. But Amos Wilson asks a very important question for those who don't know the power and importance of history. He says, if there was not a direct connection between history and money, history and power, history and domination, then why is it that the European rewrote history? And I would add to that, rewrote us out of the respectable commentary of history. So history serves a very important purpose in the life of a people. History is group memory. And if as an individual, if I lost my memory, you would say I lost my mind, because you say I have Alzheimer's or dementia or something like that, or amnesia. Those are psychological disorders. So if as an individual, if you lose your history, you lose your memory, you lose your mind. If history is group memory, what does it mean when a group of people lose their history? They lose their mind. And many of our actions oftentimes reflect that.
People, if you're not out there writing, taking notes right now, listen, you're getting a bargain. Listen, because Dr. Akua does his thing, right? And he can talk about that when he does at the end in terms of resources and whatnot. But if you're not taking notes right now, you should be taking notes right now. And you should definitely be sharing this with everybody, you know, black, white, brown, yellow, red, whoever. Because at the end of the day, Black history is world history. We impact the entire world, right? But if we're talking about truly being culturally responsive, right? And we're talking about that. We have all these things, these buzz phrases, right? These buzzwords, cultural responsiveness, you know, people getting woke, all these different kinds of things, whatnot. If we're trying to really do all these kinds of things, we have to confront, as Dr. Akua just said, the miseducation, right? The fact that history has not been taught truthfully, right? That's what he's speaking to, from its origin. Dr. Roy, you would chime in on some of that? Go ahead.
First of all, I could just sit and listen to Dr. Akua just talk. I'm sitting here like, yes, I want to be in his class. You know, I don't claim to be a historian, but there are some things about history that I study. And one of the best experiences I'll say that I had came when I was in high school in Philadelphia, when I won this oratorical contest. And WDAS, which was Black owned at the time, used to do trips to Africa. And so the prize was a trip to Senegal and Morocco. Mm-hmm. So I, as a 17-year-old, got to visit Senegal and Morocco. And I remember landing in Dakar, and my mother had to go with me because I wasn't 18 yet. And I remember looking at the people in the airport in Dakar, and I was like, Mom, those could be our cousins, you know? And what that started for me was a desire to travel everywhere Black people are around this planet, throughout the African diaspora, right? So I got to go to Brazil. Like, I remember being in Bahia and being like, this feels like I'm in North Philly. Like, sis over there looks like her name could be Keisha. Mm-hmm. Brazil has to be like the Blackest place in the world outside of continental Africa, right? But if you don't get a chance to actually, when you start doing those travels, then you see how vast the African diaspora is, how wide we are. You begin to see how connected we are to these people in all reaches of the world. And so I think it's really important. I had that partially because of the school district, because of what some Black women set up in the school district, but also those Black women who ran that African American Studies department for the school district back in 1995 was working with the Black owned radio station, right? But I'm not sure if that office exists anymore in the school district. And we know that that radio station exists in a different iteration, you know. So I do think, as much as our schools may not be doing the work that they need to do for our students in terms of history, you know, we are still our own greatest resource in terms of our people. And there's a way to still connect people to each other, to ourselves. And I hope that we can find the time and space to create those innovative opportunities for our young people. So we're learning history, but we're also seeing that we have a collective future that's rooted in the global sort of Africanness.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. So as educators, right, we all know that, you know, the education industry, right, primarily was created, you know, to prepare people to be kind of a part of a cog, like initially, be a part of a cog. You know, they brought the Horace Mann and they brought the Prussian style of education here to this country, you know, to get us prepared to work for people. And it wasn't even us. When I say us, I'm about the people that were considered citizens at the time, not us per se, those of African descent. We came much later, but initially that's what it was started for. And then we, as we're, you know, basically toiling the land, cultivating the land, and we tried to read, you know, tried to learn how to things, we would either get lynched or killed or beaten, you know, all those kinds of things, right, that would happen to us. You know, so recently, as we talk about, you know, our history being taught in schools right now today, and in particularly this month, like I said, we're more than just a month, but you got charter schools out there in Utah and different places, you know, trying to opt out of teaching, you know, Black History Month, right? When I saw that, I was like, really? Or like people writing legislation because they wanted to opt out of teaching the 1619 curriculum that was written to try to, you know, undo some of the wrongs that was, you know, done for years. And I'm not saying that even that is totally all the information that we need, but at least it starts of things that we do need, right? At least it makes more people to be woke. So it's so much that I could have stated, but talk about this right here. Growing up as a student, you talked about this a little bit, Kamika, but let's dig a little deeper. Growing up as a student in public education that wasn't really culturally responsive, speak to that a little bit. Growing up as a student in schools, either of you can go with that.
Oh, the funny thing is my miseducation was so thorough, I never even questioned a lot of the things that were being done to me and done to us as a people. My awakening came as a student at Hampton University, which was an amazing experience for me. In particular, I remember one professor in particular, though I was not a poli-sci major, Dr. Mamie Locke taught Blacks in Politics, and it was an elective that I took. And on the first day of class, she walked in and she said, right now, you're just a Negro. But if you study and listen and think, then hopefully by the end of the semester, you'll be qualified to call yourself African American. And that really stuck with me because I didn't know that I had to qualify. I thought I was born African American, you know? But what's interesting, when you said earlier about how Europeans imagine education and the fact that, in a sense, it's meant to control the masses of people, that wasn't the way it was when we did it. So, and I teach history of urban education and history of higher education. And when you go back and you look at the history, what you find is that African people had free public education in the Nile Valley of Africa for both males and females. Then when you go to West Africa, so in the Nile Valley, you've got Kemet, Nubia, and Kush, or Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia. Then you go to West Africa with the empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. You find out that African people had free public education for males and females. Then when you look at how the Moors of North and West Africa, when they took over Spain and had an influence over all of Europe, lifted Europe out of the Dark Ages with their science and technology, you find out that one of the first things that they implemented when they got there was free public education for males and females. When African people in America coming out of the enslavement experience, the first thing that we demanded was free public education for males and females, Black or white. So there would be no public education in the South were it not for Black people. For as Du Bois tells us in his book, Black Reconstruction, public education at public expense was a Negro idea. So our conception of education has always been radically different than what others have imposed upon us. I just want to make that clear. But when we look at the fact that, like I said, I was so indoctrinated, I never even questioned anything until I got to college and started, learning some different ideas and concepts and history that I had never heard. And I thought to myself, how is it that I never learned these things before? I think by the grace of the Most High and the ancestors, more of our young people are awakening to a larger consciousness, and they're coming to understand that there is something more, and they're asking questions and they're confronting their teachers, which I think is a good thing, because the current systems of schooling do need to be confronted to make sure that the education that our children receive is in fact an education rather than just schooling. Schooling is just for the purpose of reproducing current power relations, of which we're at the bottom. But of course, education helps you to meet needs and solve problems in your own community.
I have to say this one thing, and Dr. Roy, I want you to say something too as well, but I have to say this one thing before it slips my mind. Shout out to, the String Theory Charter School organization. I got a chance to meet with a bunch of educators the other day, and they were like sponges, and I'm sure they're out there watching tonight, so shout out to them. But when we talk about gaps, right? Now, today, I mentioned to them the other day that we were above the gap. Like, there was no such thing as a gap. People came to learn from us, as you just spoke about. So I had to say that,
Yes.
And then we got here, had to go through all the things we went through. They began to make these imaginary like gaps, or, these real gaps based on these other standards that didn't really apply to us anyway, because we were above the standards, we were above the gaps. And then, history took its toll on us to put us in our current situation once we became African Americans, I guess, for lack of better terms, I guess, right? So
I want to say something about that too, but I'll wait for Dr. Royal. I don't want to interject there, but I got to say something about that when we come back.
So as for me, I didn't start in public school. My mother is a graduate of Germantown High School. My mother was underserved severely by her schooling experiences, first in the Bronx, New York, and then in Philadelphia. And so she graduated in '65, and there was a lot of tracking and things like that then. And it's interesting to be somebody who teaches teachers, right? Like I'm in my 22nd year. And so there are things that as I collected my own data and then listened to the stories of my mother, it's interesting. So I see why. I can understand what was happening, you know what I mean? But I see what their angle was in terms of telling my mother things like, you're not college material, right? When the issue was, she was a different type of processor. Right. So it wasn't that she wasn't college material. She didn't process information the way it was expected. I say this because when she then has children, she sent my sister to Penrose Elementary School. So I grew up in Southwest Philly. And my sister was at Penrose for a year, and my mother was displeased with the reading instruction my sister was getting. Now, I'm first generation college. So my mother hadn't been to college, but she knew her child wasn't where she felt like she should be. And the school it essentially ran her off and told, asked her things like, well, where's your education degree from, right? So at that point, she pulls my sister out, and she decides her children are not going to go to public school. So she sent us to Christian school in the suburbs of Philadelphia. Now, my sister and I are, my sister's also a doctor of education, I'll say. She is an administrator at Michigan State University. She had a hard time in school based on how she started. Now, when I get to this Christian school, it's a little different because I know y'all can't tell, but I talked a lot and I would challenge my teachers a lot. And so I literally remember starting at this particular school in the second grade and being in the low class because I was like I was younger than everybody else, but I only stayed there for 6 weeks because I remember the day my teacher, it was a Sunday, when my teacher called my mother and said that they were moving me to the high class. But I remember opening that door and seeing all these white faces in the room, one little Black child. Now I'm leaving a classroom full of Black kids. That was the low class, to go over there to this high class with the one little, person. And so this is also the place where this class, a second grader, says to me, you need to get to the back of the line where all the niggas belong. And so that was the first time that I was like, well, this is different, right? What exactly is happening here, right? With these good Christians that I was, learning all this stuff from. I have an older cousin who is first generation college. She implored us to go to HBCUs. And she was the one who was sort of starting, if somebody asked, where did you become radicalized? I would say my cousin Yvonne is where I became radicalized. And so as she would sort of have my sister and I reading different things, I started to ask more questions at school, even as an elementary student. Now, by the time I do get to public schools like Pepper, and then Central High School, my expectations for what those schools would be, it's kind of like it wasn't that great. You know what I mean? Like we had already been so underserved, and my mother wasn't going to let her children be mistreated, so she did whatever she had to do to get us into programs she felt like would meet our needs. And while we were missing a lot, what I would say is that especially at Central, where I had Robert Jackson teaching African-American history, and I had the opportunity to do something, go to Senegal and things like that. There was something good that came out of a system that was actually intent on disenfranchising me and anybody who looked like me, right? We just happened to sort of work the system enough. My grades happened to be high enough that I could get into something that wasn't established for me at all. Right. And that went through great lengths to put out my classmates, people who looked like me. Right. Because at Central High School, special admit, you had to have special grades. But I remember very intimately 30 years ago, some of my friends who I came in with who were brilliant, but didn't have the same family arrangements, didn't interact with teachers in the same ways, and were therefore put out of Central High School. And so you're not worthy of receiving, this education here. You have to go to your neighborhood school instead. So, there's definitely some massive drawbacks to public school, but there's also massive drawbacks to private school, right? And which is one of the things I think about when I hear parents say, I'm just going to put my child in private school. Even some of my students, even yesterday, having a discussion saying, well, I think people send their children to private school because, it's less politics. And I'm like, how is it less politics? As much money as them people pay for that school. The more money you have, the more you can get the school to respond to your needs. And even as we talk about something like vouchers, you go ahead to one of these schools on some vouchers and see if these people are going to respond to you in the same way that they do to these people who are writing checks. Right? Mm-hmm. It's not the same thing. And it's not set up to be the same thing.
Yeah. Now, what do you want to comment? You remember what you wanted to say before? You're on mute, I think. You're on mute.
Yes, so like Dr. Royal's mother, my parents sent me to private schools as well. And I'm thankful for the sacrifices that they made to do that. But we also know that that situation can be woefully insufficient as well, because now what you're doing is you're paying out of pocket for your miseducation. So while you may have a little bit more proficiency in reading, writing, or math or science, or you may be a little bit better prepared to continue your miseducation in college, that's basically what most private schools do. But you're still going to be miseducated. You're still going to come out of there, in most, not all, but in many, you're still going to come out of there not knowing anything about yourself. And in this society, you can go from pre-K to postdoctorate and learn absolutely nothing about the role that your people played in history or civilization, or the accomplishments or contribution your people have made. earlier you asked a question about standards and you mentioned the achievement gap. And I always kind of jump on that term because I always have to explain to my students very early when they start throwing around that kind of language, that language was not constructed by us, okay, first of all. So, and what it leaves out is the fact that there are access and opportunity gaps that lead to persistent achievement gaps. So Black children have less of an opportunity to go to equitably funded schools. Black children have less access to highly qualified and certified teachers, particularly in the core areas of science, social studies, math, and language arts. Also, Black children tend to end up in schools where they have a teacher who has less than 5 years of experience and is oftentimes uncertified. So there are all these access and opportunity gaps that lead to the persistent achievement gaps. But when we just say achievement gap, it makes it look like the victim is actually. And so I just think we have to be mindful of that when we have those conversations, because the words that we choose are very, very important. But I know that those are the words that people are giving us and constantly throwing at us. And so we have to kind of reconceptualize those and help them to understand the systems that have been set up to ensure that those achievement gaps persist. And the last thing I'll say on that is, what if there were no achievement gap? What if we were scoring proficient in math and science and those sorts of things, yet we still had no knowledge of self? We would use that schooling process to then still basically be second-class servants. You know, so education is meant to help you to meet needs and solve problems in your own community. And oftentimes when we come out of these institutions, we don't know how to serve our community, and we don't know how to even how to provide for our basic needs of food, shelter, and clothing. So these are things that we need to be mindful of as we craft systems of schooling or education today. What do our people need, and build the curriculum based on that?
Yeah.
So I would add, about 8 or 9 years ago, I actually wrote about the false ideology of achievement gap. And it was in sitting in these ridiculous meetings in the school district of Philadelphia with the, I want to say it was the Philadelphia Education Compact or something like that. And I was listening to these people from William Penn Foundation, I think it was, talk about how they were going to be spending their money differently in the district. And they kept throwing around we want to close the achievement gap. And I said, well, research has shown that schools that have libraries and librarians, they have increased achievement. You know, but the district has eliminated libraries and librarians. You going to put your money there? And they were like, no, we want to have high performance seats and expand this, that, and the other. And I'm like, but seats don't do the work. It's people and resources that do the work, right? And so, pissed off as I was, that's how I ended up writing this piece about this false ideology. But for me, usually when somebody starts a conversation with gaps, I'm like, absolutely not. There's no conversation we finna have about Black and brown children and any alleged gap they have, unless you're talking about structural gaps, unless you're talking about systemic, intentional gaps that were built ever since this country was built, when we were denied access to all types of education and literacy. How dare you? How dare you talk to these children about what they aren't doing? I'm not, that is beyond what I'm interested in. Furthermore, an old friend of mine, we used to work together. When she started working on her doctorate in rhetoric and composition, she researched the etymology of the phrase achievement gap and found that it entered our lexicon from segregationists who were opposing the Brown v. Board ruling for school desegregation. And so the language they initially used was Negro lag. They said we can't put white kids in school with these Black kids because there's a Negro lag. But because the civil rights movement had started and people were like, well, you can't say that. So then they dog whistle Negro leg into achievement gap. There's an achievement gap, and that's why we have to resist desegregating. And then, because all words have an etymology, right? They go through a life, right? That term in the 90s gets picked up again by organizations like the Education Trust and Teach for America, right? And now all of a sudden it's the rallying cry of these, liberal education reformers. But no, there's no conversation until you're really willing and ready to have a conversation about what isn't put in place for our children, or how you're going to meet the needs of the children. Our children should not have to be Hercules in order to be successful. And that's essentially the conversation we're having. We know that you don't have this, that, and the other, but we want you to pretend you have all these things, and we want to see you score like you do.
Listen, I can
so check this out, Dr. Royal and Baba Damon. I got to add this in, because this is the story that my parents would oftentimes tell us when you talk about the power of history relevant to what you just broke down. My father was an award-winning science teacher, and after 8 years of teaching, he went to Meharry Medical School and got his DDS, Doctor of Dental Surgery, so he became a dentist. He then leaves Meharry Medical School after finishing there, and he goes to University of Michigan to get a master's in public health. Prior to all that, he was a graduate of the historic Dunbar High School during the times of segregation, Washington, D.C., Dunbar High School. My mother went to the historic Sumner High School in Kansas City, Kansas. When I asked my parents about their education, they would oftentimes say, you don't know anything about education because you didn't really receive one, because of the schools that we sent you to, that they didn't have the type of schools available that we went to, okay? And so my father talked about how amazing Dunbar High School was, in that they had, it was in a working class neighborhood, but it was an academic and athletic powerhouse that routinely outperformed all schools, black and white. Same thing with my mother's high school in Kansas City. And this is part of the narrative that we oftentimes don't hear. When I took my parents to see Hidden Figures about the amazing Black women mathematicians, they said all we saw was Black people who were brilliant in the sciences growing up. So while those women were incredible, they were not exceptional, meaning that there were all kinds of amazing Black women and men in the sciences. When my father left Meharry Medical College and went to University of Michigan, I said, well, can you compare for me the level of rigor? You're going from a small Black medical school in the South to a Research One university, a Big Ten university in the North. He said, man, there was no comparison. I said, what do you mean? He said, what those professors taught us at Meharry more than prepared me for what I experienced at the University of Michigan. It was a cakewalk. He said, not only that, when I went to my residency up in New York and Harlem, he said, if you were stuck in a procedure and you weren't quite clear on what to do, he said, medical college or from Howard University. He said it wasn't that others wouldn't help you. It was that the achievement gap that people aren't talking about, okay? When my own son had to have his wisdom teeth pulled, and my wife was looking for an orthodontist for somebody to pull his wisdom teeth, we found somebody from Meharry. I told the brother my father's story. I said, did you find that to be true? He said, yeah. He said, I went to Yale to do my residency, and I found them also. Oftentimes they would send people to me to train the other residents because they did not have the expertise. So this is a part of our story. This is a part of our history, our expertise that people don't know. People don't know about this achievement gap, the gap where whites are lagging behind Black people. And this is a whole different conversation that people just aren't typically prepared for.
Yeah, and let's literally, like you said, we can stay on this like for the entire night, right? We definitely could. The main point that you've just made, both of you, what I originally said, the universities in Africa, we were way above any gaps or any imaginary gaps. And we just got brought here and kind of plugged in or pigeonholed to say there is some sort of gap. But once again, it's all about access and opportunity, giving our access and opportunity, and then having good parents, even if they didn't know what to do, they put you around some folk that knew what to do, right? My grandmother only went to the 8th grade, period. But she made sure every single babysitter that I had, was either some sort of like reading teacher or worked in the school. Like, she strategically made sure that she put me in daycare centers of people that had been in education before. So that's where I got, shout out to Miss Smith, my first grade reading teacher, had an afro looking like, she's beautiful, looking like Angela Davis, right? So that was my first opportunity to have a teacher first year. And I didn't have too many more after her, but that first year, that foundation, and it came from Get Set and daycares and then her. I want to talk a little bit about your experience with like your pre-service teachers, preparing them, and also preparing, administrators, because you're both doing that kind of work right now at universities. Just talk a little bit about that in terms of, once again, Black History being more than a month, most of them trying to go into urban education, and how, the intersection between those two things and your passion and your whys, for example, meet the need of as you push them out into the world.
So I wouldn't say that most of my students want to go into urban education.
Okay.
I think it depends. It depends on a lot of factors. Usually the students who want to go into urban ed already have some sort of experience with urban education. Occasionally I have some who, I don't know, they did some sort of volunteering or something and they decided they want to do it. More than anything though, because I am, my title is assistant professor of urban education, and I was brought to the institution to focus on urban education. Students often have sort of strange notions of what that means. And those notions have been informed by the media, misinformed, I should say, by the media. So, and most of my students, I'm at a private Jesuit institution. Most of my students are young white women who come from the Northeast. So from Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Jersey, and then Maryland. Occasionally a little bit of Ohio and Pennsylvania mixed in. And so I hear things when we were still, in person. Our students always have to do field experience. And so when they come back from field experience the first time, they always say something like, Dr. Royal, the class was, it was orderly. And I'm like, well, you sound surprised. It is school. What do you think the people do at school? And they're like, well, nobody threw a desk. And I'm like, it's the beginning of the school year, huh? You think somebody just walks in and start throwing desks?
Oh my God.
Right? But this is what you haven't had any experience, right, in the situation. All you know is what you see in the media and social media. This is what they come with. Now, for me, I try to make my classroom a place where we can learn, right? So, which means them unlearning a lot of the stuff they have learned about their own superiority and our inferiority, right? I want to make my classroom a place that's safe enough for them to do that. I need them to air out the craziness with me so that I can disabuse them of it. But, when they're unwilling to hear the pushback and to hear where they may they may be missing the mark, that's where a challenge, comes in. And you may have heard me say before, about the young lady who projected, the N-word on my board and for her final and all that kind of stuff. While that was highly problematic and offensive, the bigger offense was that she tried to justify, she tried to tell me it was okay for her to have, this on my board, and for her just throwing this word around. And I'm like, do you understand how vile and violent and racist that is? And she's insisting that it's not, so it's bad enough that you did it. But I'm like, as long as we can talk through and you can hear where the error was, this is what we do. But when you're like, no, I have a right to do it. Well, then now we have a little bit bigger of a problem. But that's not most of my students, at least not with me. I think with them, it gets to a point where they're like, well, I'd just rather say nothing because I don't want Dr. Royal to come for me if I.
Yeah, they don't want that. They don't work. They don't want that work.
Mm.
Dr. Cool, anything
Wow.
you learn about that, about teaching your students how to be teachers?
Yeah, my students know they're going to get a daily dose from me. Um, they know that when they come to my class, I'm kind of known for bringing up all these kinds of issues and making them read things that they haven't been exposed to. But here's what I love about that. What I love about that is that they love it and come expecting that, right? Because, and they tell me, this is why I came to an HBCU, to get this kind of experience, because I didn't get it when I was an undergrad at a predominantly white institution or when I was in high school or what have you. Um, and so I really enjoy interacting with my students because there's no place that I've gone, and I've traveled all over the country to urban schools, some of the most challenging urban schools in the country, and to a number of colleges and universities. I have never been in front of an audience that did not want to hear what I had to say. And I don't mean just sitting there politely. I mean into it, like why am I just now hearing this information? Why haven't we been taught this? Why isn't this in our textbooks? And typically in some of the most challenging circumstances is where the response um, is the greatest. I'll give you a quick example. When I was doing one of my historical presentations in one school, this happened to be a school that I used to teach at before I started doing these presentations nationally full time. There was an 8th grade brother who was standing in line outside of the cafeteria where I had just presented to like 400 students. And the principal was standing behind him, but he didn't know that the principal was standing behind him. He's got his hoodie on, his pants are sagging, all of the types of things that we typically say we don't want our children to do. And he leans over to the brother standing next to him, talking about my presentation. He said, "Damn, that shit was deep." And the principal didn't even say anything. He was just so happy that this brother was engaged in this, right? I did a presentation at a major university at a biomedical symposium. And my background is not in biology or medicine, but they asked me to speak, and I talked about the African origins of the sciences and so forth. The assistant dean leans over to me after I take my seat. He said, "Damn, that shit was deep." Excuse my language, but I'm telling you the response that people have had from the urban schools all the way up to the university. People are like, "How come we've never learned this stuff before?" And it's just the tip of the iceberg. So you can imagine if you're getting this every day, if we were getting this from the beginning of our schooling experience, there's nothing that we couldn't accomplish.
Yeah, that's why it's important to say once again, tonight's topic, Black history is more than a month, right? It's definitely more than a month, and for all people, for us in particular, but for everybody in general, because the way we see the way we see ourselves, and also the way other people see us as well is extremely important. And if we're not taught these things like year round from birth, we just miss it. We just miss it. Let's talk a little bit about families and educators.
Hey, Brother Bobby Damon, can I mention something real quick
Go ahead.
For the sake of for the sake of resources, and I know I'm spitting some stuff that people may not be familiar with. I have a free online course. You can go to freeintrotoafricanaorigins.com to access that free online course to see some of the things that I'm talking about. And I just put it in the chat box, freeintrotoafricanaorigins.com.
Yes, I was going to say also there's a brother, Joe Wilson. Shout out to Joe Wilson, president of Philadelphia chapter 100 Black Men in Philadelphia. He actually asked for some resources in the question in the Q&A. He asked for some resources for grades 5, 6, and 8 in high school for Black history. So Brother Wilson, I know you're right there listening. Check out Dr. Akua. He has plenty of resources, plenty of books and materials and so on and so forth. So definitely reach out to him in his platform and to his website. Your website address is in the chat also, Dr. Akua?
Yeah, I'm putting that
I
in
got a
just
bunch
a
of
second
books
now
over
as
here
well.
right behind me. So, I co-sign the books and definitely, so anybody out there listening, definitely get those books. Talking about right now, because education has been, a trip for years. It's been not what it needs to be for years, but now we got COVID, right? Now we got COVID at the same time. So suggestions, alternate resources, you just mentioned, right? Your e-learning. In fact, I brought your platform for my educators, like for the entire unit down there in Delaware. And definitely, some because they haven't been exposed to anything once again. And I'm talking about people that don't look like us. So, and even some of those that do look like us, we're like, well, why do we gotta do this? Well, because our kids, 97% of the young men and young women that we serve look like me. And so, it's a struggle. It's a struggle. It's things that need to happen. There's some that bought in. We're not going to get everybody, but it needs to be more and more of an effort towards that. So any other resources you want to talk about, Dr. Akua? You have your website, you have the materials. Dr. Royal, anything you recommend on the resource side?
Yeah, you can go to My
Especially
Teacher Transformation.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. For books, you can go to myteachertransformation.com and click on books by Akua. We have curriculum resources for just about every grade level, and I'll put that link in the chat box as well, because it got to the point where critiquing insufficient curricula for me was not enough. And so the creator and the ancestors insisted that I create what was necessary. So that's what we've been doing for the past over 25 years, is creating curriculum resources. So you can go to myteachertransformation.com, click on Books by Akua, or just click the link that I put in the chat box. And there are a number of great resources for young people.
Yeah. And for those that are asking, there it is right there on the screen. It's in the chat box right now. So check out the chat box. Okay. Cool. Shifting a little bit, because right now it segues into our next topic, Black business, right? Black business ownership, right? And, when I first met you, Dr. Akua, it was actually, I'm going to say around 2015, I guess, at one of the ACE conferences here in Philadelphia, and all the charter schools were there, some other schools were there. And I said, this brother right here is going back to Dr. Juwanza Kajufu, shout out to him. I said, and I told you this before, you reminded me of him just in the 2000s. But when I learned from him, he inspired me years ago, back in 1990, 89, 90, to switch careers, right? When I read his book, Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys. And I said, you know what? That's what I need to be doing. I need to go be an elementary school teacher. Forget corporate America. I'm going to do that. And I'm going to use what I call reverse COINTELPRO. Coincidentally, I got on this shirt right here, Black Panther Party. I'm going to use reverse COINTELPRO to go into school districts and try to change the minds of my people, because they're not getting taught right. And that was my thing, right? That was my thing. So using that inspiration from that book, and then all the years, and then to see somebody, kind of taking the baton from, Dr. Juwanza Kajufu to do that same thing. And even on a different level with this e-learning and everything right now. But that's a business also. That's a business. So what Black-owned businesses or business owners would you like to shout out specifically for the children, for the audience listening? Because, we talk about being Black, all year, and talk about, Black is more than Black History Month. We got to talk about Black businesses too as well. So any business owners you'd like to shout out? Some we know, the major ones, but other ones are locally between, say, Baltimore, Philly, Atlanta, shout them out.
So I'll start, because you said something about my hair when I logged on. So I go to a wonderful salon called Diaspora, Black woman owned, all Black women staffed. They do a wonderful job keeping my natural curls, so they don't get too stretched out. But for natural hair care, color cutting, Diaspora Salon in Baltimore on Charles Street is a wonderful place to go. There's not these glasses, because I have now reached the age where I need bifocals, and bifocals are expensive. So I can't get bifocals from the fancy people just yet, but the glasses I just had to part with. I had 2 pairs from a great Black-owned company called Dear Emery that you can find on Instagram quite easily. I think they're on Facebook too, Dear Emery, and they do custom-made glasses. I want to give a shout out to my sister, Dr. Yaba Blay, for her whole Professional Black Girl, just everything. So Professional Black Girl is a web series she has. She has merchandise that she sells. She lifts up Black women all the time. I would definitely check her out. I would check out my little sis, my Sarah Stevie down in New Orleans at Stevana.com, selling Black Women Are for Grown-Ups merchandise. Let me see what other, Melissa's company, Perfectly Personalized. So if you're interested in ordering team gear, shirts, sweatshirts, things like that, it's Perfectly Personalized. You can find them on Facebook as well, and get your custom made items. Those are the ones that come to mind. You know what I'm gonna mention? I want to mention the salon where I get my nails done.
There you go.
So I had to quit my previous salon because I found out the lady doing my nails was a Trump supporter. And I said, you know what, let me take my black dollars somewhere else. And so I found this great salon here in Baltimore called Polished, Be More Polished. And the owner is Black woman owned, all young Black women working there. And the owner is fabulous, so fabulous that when she spotted that a service I received wasn't done quite right, she asked me to come back in, and I watched her teach the young lady how to fix her mistakes. And you know, I've been a teacher for 22 years, so watching that, right, with nails, which is not something I just like to wear them. You don't think about the teaching and the processing that goes on with that. But I was like, now I get to watch a teacher, you know, at work in this situation. So shout out to Be More Polished Nails in Baltimore on Liberty Road.
Okay. Dr. Cool, anybody want to shout out there?
Absolutely. I want to shout out the Buy Black movement. So for quality Black made products, hundreds of Black made products, you can go to buyblackmovement.com. Buyblackmovement.com is a gathering place for Black businesses to have their products distributed. So you'll see my books, my posters and DVDs and all sorts of things in their distribution channel as well. But the great thing is, if you have a great product or you know somebody else who does, and their product lends itself to international distribution, then they can be in that network. In addition, you can become an official supporter for as little as $30 a month to get things, there we go, to get things that you're using anyway. Yeah, so you can get your soaps, your shea butters, your lotions, your t-shirts, your hoodies, all jewelry, all sorts of things at the Buy Black movement. Great to get gifts and things that you use on a regular basis. So I highly recommend the Buy Black movement. It's Black from top to bottom, side to side. Very, very important. So it's Black made products distributed by Black people, manufactured by Black people, and so forth. And then I want to say something about educating our children with a Black business mindset. Very, very early on, I taught my son when he was 6 years old how to do an invoice and how to do a business. He said, well, what's an invoice? I told him what an invoice is. That's how you bill a person for the services or goods that you provide. He said, well, what kind of business can I do? I said, well, we'll start you off. You know, you can take out the trash and I'll pay you for that. He said, so I was teaching him how to write up his invoice, and he put take out the trash. I said, well, you don't want to say that. We'll call it waste management. You know, so you want to use the technical term, right? And the idea is if he could go online and find all these little games and things that he was playing, then he could do an invoice. And he can say, well, fast forward, now he's 21 years old and his younger brother is 18, and they now work in my business, but they're not my employees, they're subcontractors. So they send me for technology, those kinds of things. And So they already have a Black business mindset that nobody can determine, how much I'm going to make. I get to determine that. I don't have to wait till the first of the month to get paid or the first and the 15th. I can determine how much money I'm going to make. And that type of mentality is worth more than gold, because we taught them we're not job takers, we're job makers. That doesn't mean you won't have to get a job at some point for a short period of time. But the idea is that we are job makers and creators, and we create our own economy through our own ingenuity.
Yeah, definitely a couple I'm going to shout out right now. This young lady, by the name of Chef Jenny. Check her out on Instagram, private chef. I booked her recently for a private party, and she does an amazing job. Chef Jenny on Instagram. Also, the Philadelphia Diamond Company, Black-owned business, and I actually have an Atlanta diamond company as well, Black-owned business. Yeah, those folks that are looking at different things, tomorrow, happens to be Black Love Day, for example, right? If you're looking for something nice gift for your mate or whatever, check them out. Those are the two businesses. I have to shout out one of my former football players too, Kamal Bledsoe. Just want to shout him out because he's an entrepreneur now. He probably graduated from college. He worked for me for like 1 year and just became an entrepreneur. And he's like, I won't say how much money he has. I'm gonna put him out there like that, but he's definitely doing very, very well. I see him all over the world as a young guy doing this thing, real estate, flipping out, doing this thing, has a furniture store, has a barbecue sauce, check him out on Instagram as well, Kamal Bledsoe. You get a chance to see what he's doing and some of his business work. And he's right here in the Philadelphia area. That's where he's from, but he's basically worldwide now in a short period of time as a young man. So definitely we need to be promoting our kids. And also, Doc, talk about the major that you have at your university, because the last time we spoke, you talked about you have an entrepreneur class down there or major or something at Clark?
There is an entrepreneurial institute at Clark Atlanta University. So yeah, I'm not in that department, so I can't say as much about it as I would like to. But I would say for all of the teachers and parents out there listening, one of the challenges that I ran into that kind of got me on the mindset of being more entrepreneurial was, to build my business, to get this information out, to publish books and so forth. I had to start becoming as passionate about business and marketing as I was about culture, history, and education, just to be able to sustain a publishing company and consulting company and things of that nature. The other thing is, about 10 years into my teaching career, I was teaching middle school, it became apparent to me that my same students that could run down our history because of the way I taught it to them would still have to go outside of their community to ask somebody for a job. And that represented a serious conflict for me. And so from that point forward, I started teaching my students, about economic empowerment and so forth. By the way, I was not a history teacher, nor was I an economics teacher. I was a language arts teacher, but I was infusing the culture and the history into everything that I did. So the things that we would read, the conversations that we would have in class, the projects that we would do and things of that nature were centered around these things. So it's very, very important that we put our children in a position to be able to provide for themselves, where they don't have to go outside of their community to the very same people that are shooting us down and beating us down in the streets to ask them for a job. We need to be able to support ourselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. So some of the other things you want to talk about is also cultural celebrations. And I often, say that we don't have to wait for the 36 days, right? 28 days of February. Kwanzaa, which I definitely say we should do that all year round anyway, but Kwanzaa that particular week, and Martin Luther King Day, right? If you look at that mathematically, that's 36 days of the year, right? And, that's only like 10% of the time that people recognize themselves as being Black. And this is kind of going off script a little bit, but recently, even with this, there was a gentleman, a politician, I forget his name. A Black man, he wanted to do away with Black History Month, I guess, in this area, in the city or in his state. I forget what his name was.
That's in Michigan, the guy.
Yeah, Michigan.
Governor.
Right. Now, the thing of it is, you can look at it two ways. Like, he's totally nuts, right? You can look at it that way. But was he saying, and he probably wasn't saying this, but is he saying that we should have African history, African quote unquote American history history of the African diaspora throughout all the curriculum, throughout everything that we know it should be about. Like if he was saying
I'm
that,
pretty sure that's not what he was saying.
that's not what he was saying. I know, but even I said a couple of years ago when I was going to buy a set of textbooks, for the school, and I was trying to find a African American history textbook, and it was like outdated, and I wasn't going to buy that crap. I think I might have bought some alternative resources from Dr. Akua, just like him. We're going to use some of this here. That's more authentic, right? But really looking at the American quote unquote history book or the world history book, if we were truly embedded, right, within those books or all cultures, like going back to the wheel you shared at a recent conversation, Dr. Akua, and I've shared this wheel several times. I have every single culture in the wheel, then had the subject matter inside the middle of it, right? If all the curriculum was truly made that way, there'd be no need for a different month or this or that or whatever. But since it's not, we need to celebrate, right? And we need to as the kids would say, put it on fleek, so to speak, for the kids that are out there, put it on fleek so that we can elevate, ourselves, so that's not what he was talking about. I wish curriculum was really made that way. But yeah, we're going to talk about some cultural celebrations that you guys think we should recognize that aren't being recognized, and your opinions about that. And I'm going to share a few too as well.
Cultural celebration. When you say cultural celebration, one of the first things that comes to mind for me is Adun Day in Philly. Just how beautiful it always was for me to be home, to be under the sun with all these African people, my West Philly Africans and North Philly Africans, and just enjoying each other and the dancing and the drumming and the fellowshipping.
What is that? I'm not familiar with Adun Day.
Oh, Damien, you want to talk about Adun Day?
It's like the first week in June, right? It takes place the first week in June, like around June 8th.
Sunday. I want to say it's usually the second Sunday in June.
Second week in June. And I know early in the morning, I know we get down there later in the day, you get all the vendors, you get the food, it's like a festival kind of thing. And also early in the morning, elders would go to the river and pray, right? And homage to the ancestors. So it kind of starts off with that, right? And then it's the festival all day long, food and vendors. And then there's usually some sort of, show performance. Shout out to Universal Ensemble Dancers and Drummers, one of my favorite. I always say, Public Enemy, Boogie Down Productions, right? And then also Universal Ensemble Dancers and Drummers, right? Because those are my top three groups when it comes to learning knowledge of self and representing the culture with that. They normally perform at that event. And you may have maybe KRS One thing. KRS One was at the last one. Didn't have it this year because of COVID, but KRS One was the last one. That's my guy, right? So but it's a great festival. Once the world opens back up, Dr. Cool, and you're up this way, we definitely need to check out the Adun Day Festival. It runs all the way up and down South Street. Shout out to Jordan Harris, one of my football players, Jordan Harris, who's a politician, state representative. That's his area. Him and Kenyatta Johnson, I believe, they have that area, so they help put that on every single year. They do a great job down there in South Philadelphia. The Adun Day Festival. Yeah. What kind of festivals like that? I mean, Atlanta used to have a lot of stuff years ago. I don't know about so much now because all gentrification and whatnot, but is anything going on like that similarly now in the Atlanta area?
I know in May, they usually have the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement Festival, which is a large festival that takes place. There's also one called the Collard Green Festival that's put on just outside of Atlanta in Lithonia, Georgia. But I did want to call attention. Yeah, it's you got the vendors, you got the music, the whole nine. You got the speakers, musicians, drums, all that kind of stuff. It's wonderful. Okay. But what also comes to mind in South Carolina and the Sea Islands of Georgia, you have Gullah festivals, which are really powerful. I always tell people, if you have never been to the continent and you've never been to the Caribbean, the next best place would be the Sea Islands of South Carolina and Georgia, where you have this heavy cultural continuity in terms of they kept the culture very well because they were isolated on the islands. And so these were also the first places oftentimes where captive Africans were brought to. And so they retained their culture in ways that it was not necessarily fully retained when you get to the mainland, okay? Also bear in mind, a lot of history in that area, but also bear in mind that when Carter G. Woodson established Negro History Week, which is now Black History Month, He never intended it for it to be a week of study or a month of study. He intended it for it to be a culmination of what you had studied all year up to that point. And then you have celebrations and plays and recitations of poetry and speeches and all those sorts of things. So today it's seen as something as the only time we can be Black. But you know, my students have always known that we Black 24/7 and that you're gonna get a daily dose whenever you step into my classroom.
So let me share the screen a little bit, just to show some additional things that folks can celebrate if they don't know. Okay, so here's, if you can see that screen. So obviously we just talked about Kwanzaa. It takes place typically, you know, for the 7 days last week in December up to the 1st in January, you know, and teaching the Nguzo Zaba, you know. Also, you have Indigenous Peoples Day, right? Let me go into the presentation mode. There we go. Get you down here. You have different things. Indigenous Peoples Day, you know, Native American. My grandmother taught me growing up that essentially, you know, may she rest in peace, but she was from Talbotton, Georgia, which is like the southern part of Georgia. And our people kind of got together with the Seminole Creeks. So she always told me when I was a child that I was part Seminole Creek and African. And so Indigenous Peoples Day, you know, looking at, you know, what he called, quote unquote, the Native Americans, but, you know, definitely getting away from that whole Columbus Day thing and looking at us as a people, you know, those of us of African descent and then the indigenous people to this land. Black Love Day, shout out tomorrow for everybody. Listen, I don't necessarily celebrate any European-made holidays, but I will celebrate Black Love Day. Special things going on tomorrow, you know, so I'm looking forward to that. You know, for those of you who have like your mates and your loves and so on and so forth, if you're looking for something, you know, to do different than just regular Valentine's Day, you could do Black Love Day, right? And it's been about 25 years, I guess now. 25 years it's been going on. So definitely do it. When I mentioned that to folks earlier, they're like, what's that? Well, here it is. Here it is, Black Love Day. African countries, Independence Day. So various African countries, right, that exist. You know, you can connect, you know, with one of them and just celebrate their culture right here. What's to stop you? You don't have to always do what's on the calendar. We can create our own calendars, right? In terms of celebrating ourselves, you know, definitely do that. You know, Dashiki Day, right? You know, if you want to dress up day or do something in your home or do something in your school, you know, pick a day when you can wear dashiki every single day, like Dr. Akua does just about, right? I have a bunch too as well. I think because of COVID, they don't all fit the same way anymore. I can still put them on, you know, but, you know, I got to get rid of this COVID-15. I'm being generous to myself, but I still have my
conscious hoodies though, too.
Say that again?
I like the conscious hoodies though, too.
Oh,
absolutely. I like what you have.
And I got a bunch of those too, yeah, without a doubt. You know, so whatever. I mean, we make our own holidays, right? Juneteenth, and it was so interesting this past summer how a lot of people just learned about. You want me to talk about that a little bit? But everybody just started learning about Juneteenth, and in certain states they began to give us like days off if you work for somebody. Like that had never really happened before. Anybody want to talk about that a little bit? The Juneteenth, the new phenomenon to some people. We knew about it. Any comment? No, not really.
I can, but Dr. Royal, did you want to say something first?
Just that I didn't learn about Juneteenth until I went to college. So for the first 18 years of my life, I didn't know what Juneteenth was. I learned about it from Professor Minnie Fort, my speech professor at North Carolina Central University. She's still very, very active in the Durham community, but her birthday is June 19th. And I remember her saying her birthday was Juneteenth. And I was like, what's that? And she was like, no. What is that? What have y'all been doing in Philadelphia? And I was like, ma'am, I never heard of Juneteenth. So that's the sort of thing that happens when you go to an HBCU. They're not just getting you together in class, but they're getting you together outside of class as well.
And I would add to that, I too, you know, hadn't heard about it until I was in college, but I will say that when you saw this summer where there were some companies that were offering people the day off for Juneteenth, that's corporate America scrambling to try to figure out how to placate back people. Okay, let's give them Juneteenth off. Just Tell them to stop burning down the country and tell them to stop looting and so forth. But the idea is that, along with taking down Confederate statues and all these types of things are good, but those are symbols, and that's not the substance of what our real demands were. So if you're going to take down Confederate statues, that's great, because they never should have been up to begin with. If you want to give us Juneteenth off, that's fine, that's wonderful. But a lot of times they will throw symbols at us rather than the substance of what we're looking for in terms of reparations and things of that nature. So we have to be careful not to just fall for those things as a poor substitute for what's really due to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We agree 100%. So Marcus Garvey Day, shout out. And I'm still waiting for the, got this book over here, the Philosophies and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, and some other documents that I've read as well. Looking forward, I think, to the movie someday, hopefully, with Delroy Lindo. I heard there was talk of that. I don't know if that's still in the works or not. I think that would be amazing, because I believe Delroy might be Jamaican. I'm not sure. I'm not for certain, but he would make a great Marcus Garvey if that's going to ever happen. So, August 17th, for those of you that don't know out there, definitely you could look at, paying homage to Marcus Garvey, on that day. Looking for other holidays that we could add on to our calendars. And then clearly, my guy, Malcolm X Day, definitely, I'm just about every time I can get there, Malcolm X Park here in Philadelphia, 52nd and Larchwood, I'm there, a lot of people there representing for the culture. It's like a little small mini festival in poetry and arts and speaking and just bringing, a consciousness to what's going on, out there in the world about that good brother right there. So definitely, we don't have to wait for just all the holidays that are given to us. We can celebrate ourselves year round, all day, every day, as a people, is my main point. So looking at what the title of this topic tonight, Black History is More Than a Month. I got a little piece that I'm just going to share with the world, and I call it Black All Year. So I think with Kamika, are you still doing poetry, Kamika, or you don't have time to do it anymore? You kind of gave it, because Kamika, dope. You can spit something, Kamika, because I don't want to, if you got something,
no, that's no.
Not anymore, because I'm putting her out there, because Kamika is very, very dope poet also. When I met her, she was still doing poetry. At least she did it for my class that one day when you came by the class.
That was 11 years ago.
That's okay. So, but once a poet, always a poet. Once a poet, always a poet, for sure. I'm gonna read this piece though called Black All Year, right? And it speaks to what we're talking about tonight. And I wrote this probably around that time, 11 years ago, but I still read them from time to time. I can't remember that stuff anymore, but I can read on paper. So, Black history is more than a month. I mean, when Brother Dr. Carter T. Woodson started the week, is a month all he really wanted? Or did he mean for us to stay blunted on our contributions to all societies? See, in America, they give us King Day, Kwanzaa, Black History Month. That amounts to 36 of the 365 days in a year. So what are we supposed to do? Recognize our heritage only 10% of the time? Answer, don't let anyone define you but you. You are Black every day. No matter what others may think, the heck what they may say. Now, your Blackness needs to be more than your skin color, jewels, or clothes. It's not your hair, your body, or the width of your nose. Being Black is a state of mind. Read to attain knowledge of self, not just textbooks on how to achieve wealth. One of the problems with our people is we are always trying to do things to be equal. Just because something was created by the other doesn't mean that it's better than what was made by those that came from the motherland. What Black faces of all cultures need to realize is that our history is more than a month. Our story is priceless, timeless, and the first. What more should we want? 40 acres and a mule? You better wake up, fools. This education is freedom. So please don't act dumb by taking this opportunity for granted, because when you look back on it, you'd wish that you hadn't. In closing, it doesn't really matter what color you are, because if you shoot for the moon, someday you might land on a star. I am proud of the greatness that my ancestors accomplished from before and since they brought us here. So for me, my history is more than a month, because I'm Black 365 days a year. And people, that's what we need to be, Black. 365 days a year, not just 36 days. So any special announcements you got going on? Anything else you want to share for the night? Dr. Akua, Dr. Royal, drop it.
I really just want to thank you for having this, creating this sacred space for us to have this dialogue. And I want to encourage others in everything that you do to carve and create sacred space where we can be who we are. Encourage our children to be economically empowered in such a way that they do not have to be under the economic or intellectual or professional authority of people who are not in their own image and interest, so that our children can work in our community, for our people, and not have to worry about how they're being discriminated against or treated. I think that's one of the most important things that we have to do for this generation, is to build institutions that are sacred and safe spaces for us to be us.
I share.
I would say that I'm going to remind myself and remind us that everything we do for us should be rooted in and guided by and fueled by our love for each other. Social media is an interesting space, and a lot of times I don't like to have public conversations with people on social media, because it's like trying to do something in a place like a schoolyard, with all these sort of onlookers. And I watch us talk about, people like the sister who had the Gorilla Glue in her hair. And I just kind of wonder sometimes, where's the love? How are we showing each other, Black people, that we love each other, regardless? How can we make sure we're guided and fueled by our love for each other and our commitment to each other?
Yeah. Well, listen, I hope that you were out there tonight taking notes, getting all these gems, getting these free bars, but definitely go inside the chat, check out these different links. You want to talk about what you got coming out in a few months, Dr. Royal? You want to talk about that a little bit?
Nope. No, I'll say I am under contract with Harvard Education Press for my book on 50 years of racism and school reform in public schools in Philadelphia. I am halfway done the book, and I am also, you clapping, but I'm also 4 months late. So if you pray, just pray that I can meet the rest of these deadlines so my editor doesn't fire me. So I'm just trying to get that done.
Well, I'm looking forward to that piece of work. Definitely when the pre-orders go out, put that link, I'm there. I'm definitely going to get that book. And Dr. Akua, anything else new you got coming out? Anything else new? Anything else new? You always got something coming. You always got something cooking. I know if it's not out yet, it's in the works.
More online curriculum.
Yeah.
We have a number of things, but you can go to tpiclassroom.com. In the works right now, that's gonna change the game. It's gonna absolutely change to the truth of who we are. So I'm excited about that.
Okay, awesome. And for those educators out there, school leaders, if you're interested in just reach out to the String Theory organization for what they got a chance to see this past week. The intersectionality, right? Attentional teaching, the intersectionality of race, equity, and the standards. I'm doing that presentation right now, and I can honestly say I was very surprised that even I had 100-something, educators on the call when it was over, and for like the next 45 minutes afterwards, they were still there, right? They were still there, and it was beautiful. It was beautiful to have that sort of engagement, and looking forward to doing some more things with them in the future. Shout out, to their CEO of that particular school, Dr. Joe Parker Clark, another one of your sorors, as a matter of fact. Sorors and people doing the things all over the world, right? Just doing the daggone thing. So that concludes us for tonight, people. You guys stay on for a second. I'm going to end the feed, but hopefully everybody got something out there. And remember to please educate all children equally. And thank you for coming out there. To everyone else in the Facebook world, God bless you and good night.